The following program presents principles designed to promote good health and is not intended to take the place of personalized professional care. The opinions and ideas expressed are those of the speaker. Viewers are encouraged to draw their own conclusions about the information presented.
Hello and welcome to Health for a Lifetime. I'm your host, Don McIntosh. We're glad that you joined us today because we're going to be talking about a very important subject. In fact, it afflicts many people, mostly women, but also some men in America. And it's the subject of bulimia and anorexia. So joining us today to talk about this important subject is Jennifer Swerger. And Jennifer, where do you live?
Philadelphia.
And you're an author, you're a singer. We met some years ago. I've always appreciated your ministries. And you know, you're sharing here in this subject from the perspective of some really good research. It's been endorsed by, dietitians and psychologists and others. But also the thing that's most powerful about that is that you're coming from your own personal experience in a way as well.
That's right. I'm a survivor of anorexia.
Okay, great. So
Many years ago.
Let's talk about this, anorexia and bulimia. How prevalent is this problem?
Well, let's look at our first graphic here. About 5 to 10 million females in the U.S. are thought to have some form of disordered eating.
5 to 10, that's a lot.
So our population is about almost 300 million, right? Mm-hmm. So you do the math. It's a significant percentage. Mm-hmm. So 5 to 10 million.
And would there be some of those that would be considered borderline? Or
sure.
Are these full-blown cases, 5 to 10 million?
No, not necessarily, but some form of disordered eating, meaning you're not normal in the area of eating.
Mm-hmm. Now, you know, thinness hasn't always been in, or has it?
No, it has not always been in vogue like it is today. In fact, days of yore, we have an association with beauty and a little more flesh, especially on the female body. So the soft folds of a woman's body, the fullness of flesh was considered beautiful. Look at the next graphic. Think about some of the Renaissance paintings. For instance, the Mona Lisa. She was not thin.
No, she looks. She looks like she's put away a couple veggie burgers.
That's right. She's full of flesh, but that's considered beautiful. I was looking at another painting. This one's Da Vinci, but I was looking at a Michelangelo painting, The Creation of Eve. And I looked at Eve and I said, she would qualify as fat today. Mm-hmm. But that was considered beautiful back then. Things have gradually changed. I want to look at a couple of things having to do with the Industrial Revolution, because that female standard of beauty and well-rounded beauty was in place for many centuries, including pre-Industrial Revolution. You can see by these graphics that the women were, they were normal to sometimes a little on the full side. But then this radically changed as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And let's look at post-Industrial Revolution fashions. You can see the pinched waist.
What's that called? Corsets? Or?
Yeah, well, they used corsets to get that look. It's called the pinched waist or whatever. These women have a much narrower profile, and they have that very small waist and various forms. I would say this, that various forms of thinness, although the thinness changed over the next couple centuries, but various forms of thinness have been in vogue since then.
That just looks painful, those dresses.
It is painful, but to them it's worth it because they want that look.
Uh-huh.
So the question is, what changed as a result of the Industrial Revolution as relates to food?
Yeah, that's a good question.
We're going to break it down a little bit here.
All right, yeah.
What changed? What changed? Well, you think about it.
Food became more processed.
That's right. Well, no, it didn't just become more processed. It became more available.
More available. Abundant.
Pretty much everybody had food after the Industrial Revolution because of transportation and different agricultural techniques. Abundant food wasn't only something that the wealthy had after the Industrial Revolution.
It was a chicken in every pot.
That's right. And so as a result, there was a changing thinking about body fat, because body fat, if you think about it, is a form of food, isn't it?
Yeah, it used to be food.
That's right. It's food in a stored form. So there
Right.
were changing thoughts on body fat, and I want to look at this graphic for a moment here and just break this down a little. As food became more available, there wasn't as much of a need for food in the form of stored fat.
So in other words, you didn't have to be as fat, like
To
hibernate
get
through
through the
winter.
winter. That's
Okay.
correct. And so fat became disassociated from wealth. Women could afford to be thinner because they didn't need to worry about having to go for long periods without food, right? And then as a result of that, thinness eventually became associated with wealth, so that the higher class of women could afford to be kind of frail and have that, oh, I'm fainting kind of look to them, you know.
Okay.
That became vogue. That became, you know, and if you think about it, the culture back then was very much about women being very frail and fainting all the time and just exhausted and all these things, and men coming to their rescue. So thinness and frailty became fashionable, partly as a result.
So let me just summarize this. You're saying that it used to be necessary to be fat because you need to hibernate through the winter or
Right.
whatever, and fat was a sign of wealth because you had what you needed, and everybody could see you had what you needed to make it through hard times.
Right.
But then it kind of shifted when food was really available. They had the Walmarts and
That's
everything
right.
else came in, not
Well,
so
they
much
didn't
like
have
that.
Walmart,
But it was much more available,
That's
and
right.
then wealth became associated with, I'm so rich, I could go get food anytime I want down
And
at the store.
Not only that, but I don't have to work. I don't have to work hard. I just sit around all day so I can afford to be frail. So this was kind of a gradual metamorphosis.
And this was the Industrial Revolution. You mean by that when all these things became mechanized, there was the mass production of everything, and there was just availability of all kinds of things. That's when this switch took place.
Roughly around that time, that triggered this chain of events that eventually led to this idealization of thinness in women. And then there were several other factors.
Like what?
For instance, well, first of all, I want to look at a graphic of a corset, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things women went through around that era to make themselves look fashionable. This corset effectively compresses the internal organs so that you can get that very thin-waisted look. Very, very harmful to the body, obviously.
Pushing
Some
all
would-
the organs up,
That's
making
right.
it hard to breathe, all that kind of stuff.
That's right. Later on, we're going to have a picture of a person in a corset that's just extreme.
So this took hold, this kind of fashion.
This kind of fashion. And then around the 1920s, and I'm fast forwarding through a lot of decades here, but around the 1920s, the idealization of thinness changed a little bit into the flapper look. And if you remember, instead of having that pinched waist, the flapper was one straight, thin, kind of tube-like structure of a woman's body, and then thin legs and thin arms. But again, another form of thinness is idealized in the fashion world. So different, what you see as you start to study these things is, in one way or another, women are pinched, pulled, pushed, stuffed to change into the ideal of fashion. And ever since the Industrial Revolution, and worsening with time or increasing with time, the ideal has been a thin ideal for the most part.
So, and fashion, I mean, they want to change every year because, of course, that's a new revenue stream for them. They want to make it different.
right.
So what comes around doesn't necessarily go around, at least that soon, because they want to make their money.
That's right. Okay, another factor that came in was the sexual revolution of the 1960s. And
Okay.
again, we're fast forwarding through a number of decades, but the sexual revolution brought in several features. One was birth control. Women generally had birth control available, so they had quote-unquote sexual freedom. Partly as a result of that, and partly as a result of other factors, divorce increased. Because older women were now finding themselves single because of the increase in divorce, and they were finding themselves active and dating. There was a greater pressure on them
To
to be
look good.
physically attractive,
According to what the fashions were.
according to what the fashions were, and so they were more and more pressured to conform to fashion's ideal of beauty so that they could, work the market, so to speak, and attract men. The culture of the image is another factor. The proliferation of photographs in the latter part of the 1900s. I think the first photograph was sometime back in the 1800s, but as technology increased, and now with the computer age, we have just the availability of images is just very great, and we have images everywhere. So I call it.
These photographs have been really kind of negative because people always want to look good in whatever society says good is.
What's happening to women today is we are constantly barraged with images of perfect women. And not only have these women had the best of genetics, the best of makeup and hair design, the best of fashion, but they've also had the best of plastic surgery. They've had the best of computer-generated, cosmetics. I mean, they look perfect. And so we're constantly surrounded with these images of female perfection, and it's very intimidating to the average woman who's just, normal looking. And so that increased the pressure. I call that the culture of the image, because it used to be you got a magazine, it was all printed words, right, and people read. But now it's mostly pictures and a few printed words. So the proliferation of the image has an impact here. And then if you think about the fashion industry, let's start back in the 1960s and 70s. Let's start with Twiggy. Do you remember Twiggy?
Twiggy 99, something like that. Yeah, I remember hearing about this.
Twiggy was 97 pounds. Let's look at the graphic of Twiggy here. 97 pounds, between 93 and 97 pounds, probably about 95 pounds. And she was 5'6". This was back in...
Very tall, very thin.
She's not real super tall, but she's very, 95 pounds. That's really, really thin.
Right.
I'm about 115. So 95 pounds would be, and I'm 5'6", so 95 pounds would be 20 pounds off of me.
Wow.
That was how thin Twiggy was.
Very thin.
And
too thin.
That's too thin. And so that jump-started what I would like to call the thinness revolution. And as a result, we have this incredible obsession with thinness in our culture today, and particularly as pertains to catwalk fashion. This isn't so much true of Hollywood actresses and actors. They're not as skinny. But if you look at the catwalk models...
The ones that go down and show off the different clothes at the... whatever the name of the designer is.
The reason they keep them so thin is because they resemble a coat hanger. The clothes just hang on them, then the focus is on the clothes and not on the woman's body. Now you tell me, what age group are the ones that view these catwalk models and that are most, concerned
Probably
with
teens.
Teens, that's right.
Yeah, they're trying to impress them to buy all their clothes.
That's right. So for these teenagers, this very, very thin ideal is held before them, and not surprisingly, eating disorders are much more prevalent among young women.
We're talking with Jennifer Swerzer. She has a webpage, jenniferjill.org, isn't that right?
That's right.
And you can access some of this information there. Look, if you're watching today, for the young lady, for the young man, mostly young ladies that are watching today, this history has been illuminating. I mean, the reason you're going through this is trying to help these individuals who are watching say, hey, look, it wasn't always this way. There's another way to look at things. Don't just be a consumer. Don't just fall into this trap.
That's part of the recovery process, is recognizing that you may have imbibed of these messages even unconsciously. You might not even know how these things are impacting you, and if you can start to identify it, that's often the first step away from the problem.
Do you find that a lot of people come up to you and talk with you when you're presenting this material in different places? Maybe someone's parents versus that. How about the people themselves that are struggling with anorexia? Do they come and talk to you?
In reality, eating disorders are not that large of a segment of the population. I think the lifetime prevalence rate of anorexia is 0.5%, which is 0.5%. That means for the entire life of an individual, they've had anorexia at any time. So that's about 5.5%. And then bulimia, it's between 1 and 3%. So it's not a huge percentage of people that actually have the disorder. However, everybody's influenced by these cultural factors and reacts in one way or another to them and feels the pressure that pushes some people over the edge into an eating disorder. And not only that, but often people are a loved one of someone with an eating disorder. So what I get a lot of when I give these kinds of talks is women feeling a sense of relief that, yeah, I do feel like I have to be perfect, and I'm not. And they come to an understanding of the way that society is impacting them. And then what I do is I appeal to them to value themselves on a different basis than the way they look.
When we come back, we're going to continue talking with Jennifer Swerzer about anorexia and bulimia. We're going to look at a little more of the history, but what the impact this has been on our culture and maybe how we can start to avoid these problems. So join us when we come back.
Have you found yourself wishing that you could shed a few pounds? Have you been on a diet for most of your life, but not found anything that will really keep the weight off? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, then we have a solution for you that works. Dr. Hans Deal and Dr. Eileen Ludington have written a marvelous booklet called Reversing Obesity Naturally, and we'd like to send it to you free of charge. Here's a medically sound approach successfully used by thousands who are able to eat more and lose weight permanently without feeling guilty or hungry through lifestyle medicine. Dr. Deal and Dr. Levington have been featured on 3ABN, and in this booklet, they present a sensible approach to eating, nutrition, and lifestyle changes that can help you prevent heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer. Call or write today for your free copy of Reversing Obesity Naturally, and you could be on your way to a healthier, happier you. It's absolutely free of charge, so call or write today.
Welcome back. We're talking with Jennifer Swerzer. She has written a book on anorexia and bulimia. It's called Dying to Be Beautiful. And if you put that in your search engine like I did just a few minutes ago, probably will come up. Or you can go to her webpage, jenniferjill.org. You also are involved with like a vegetarian cafe, and you sing, and what don't you do? You do a lot of different things.
Windows.
You don't do windows. Okay, and you're the mother of two.
Mother of two.
And happily married for
26 years.
26 years. And you're a survivor from anorexia and bulimia. Right. So whatever we talk about today, the big message is you're sitting here, so there's hope.
That's right.
What we talked about in the first segment, if you just joined us, was kind of how anorexia and bulimia has become more prevalent. We've been talking about the fact that thinness has not always been in, the changes that came through the Industrial Revolution, the changes that came in the fashion industry, and then the sexual revolution in the 1960s. So we talked about all those different things, and you led us through the fact that, fat used to be where it was at.
That's right.
But now thin is in.
Many of us would love to go back to that day.
Right. And I mean, it was a sign of being affluent and being someone that was looked up to.
That's right. That person has money.
That person has money because they've eaten a lot of food.
And it's not that way anymore.
It's not now. Now it's kind of shifted. So in the second segment, you want to look a little more closely at, some more technical aspects, and then what you call the fat gap. What's the fat gap?
The fat gap is the fact that, for the most part, we're going to dwell on this a little more later, but as the ideal of thinness has gotten thinner and thinner with each passing year, real women have gotten fatter. And so what I'm saying is that women are not succeeding at reaching their ideal of beauty. And this sets them up for a lot of stress and a lot of sense of failure. Most women will diet, many women diet. Most of them will fail to achieve their goal in dieting. So most women are heavier than they would like to be. And they are constantly faced with these images of perfection and thinness and beautiful figures. And as a result of that, feeling a constant sense of failure. Most women will just kind of settle into that and feel defeated. But there are a few women who will reach their goal, and a few of those women who will go beyond it and develop pathological dieting. And that depends on their personal makeup, kind of who they are as a person. The individual that goes over the line, that has to do with, certain factors within them. Mm-hmm. But so, the same pressure is on every single woman.
And this is kind of triggered as these images proliferate. In other words, there's, you look at the newsstand, you don't see, a whole bunch of people that are overweight as the model for what you want to look like.
And we can do something to control how many images we see, obviously, not watching television, not watching movies, not being on the web all the time and getting fashion magazines. But even the woman who completely avoids all of those things is impacted by them because, you go to the grocery store, and there they all are staring at you as you're in the checkout line. So it does affect all of us, I think.
So you say that dieting is a national pastime. What do you mean by that?
I mean that just about everyone at one point or another is dieting. People generally feel like they need to lose weight. And the reality is, and this is kind of the caveat of the situation, is that most of us do.
Need to lose weight.
That's right. We're a fat nation, becoming more so. Obesity is pandemic.
Yeah.
But I'm not focusing on that. That's a larger problem affecting a greater population of people. But there are a few people that will react to the same. There's two things going on: the proliferation of images of perfect bodies, but also the proliferation of food, and the proliferation of images of food. So you're constantly being told, be thin, be thin, be thin, and then you're told, eat, eat, eat.
Yeah.
If you watch like primetime television, some of the family shows and the, the girly shows and stuff, the women are always eating. I don't know if you've noticed that, but
I haven't noticed it.
you haven't noticed. But they're thin, they're beautiful, and they're eating all the time. So you're constantly getting this duplicitous image, this duplicitous message, you know, eat and be thin.
Yeah.
And they don't go together.
They don't go together.
And so some women just respond to that by gaining weight, but some just go over the edge and develop an eating disorder.
So how do you know when you've developed an eating disorder? How do you know when you've crossed that line from, you know, a good sense of guilt,
Yeah.
saying, hey, look, I shouldn't be eating this and whatnot, to becoming pathological?
Well, we're going to go into the criterion for an actual bona fide case of anorexia or bulimia in the next show, but I would say in a nutshell, if food and dieting and figure are all important to you, you've got a problem. Because we are so much more than just who we are physically, you know?
Right. Now, I know that we haven't defined this in this show, and we're probably assuming people know the difference between anorexia and bulimia, but what is the difference between anorexia and bulimia?
Okay, in a nutshell, anorexia is self-starvation, just not eating enough to sustain your weight. And bulimia is a binging and purging disease that involves the same diet and thinness obsession. However, it manifests itself in a different way. People will eat large quantities of food and then find a way of purging either through vomiting or exercise or other means.
So if you are eating a lot and then going somewhere else and throwing it up, you've got bulimia.
That's a problem, yes.
Yeah.
Well, you very well could.
Very well could.
Yeah.
You know, I mentioned to you that in my own family and some of my family, there were a number of men that had this, and you were like kind of surprised.
I was surprised because 90 to 95% of eating disorders are women. And you can see why, because fashion impacts women much more. Men can be, I say it this way, men can be as frumpy as they want, typically. I mean, there's not as much stress on men to be physically perfect. You know, a man can be successful and be pretty ugly. But women, I'm serious about this, but women have to be good looking. And so there's not as much pressure on men. I mean, there's more now that men are starting to get plastic surgery and different things, but there's way more, and there has historically been much more on women, much more pressure.
So this is, you know, this disparity between what we expect men to look like versus women really fuels this.
That's right. It really fuels it. And for most women, it just makes them very frustrated and have very low self-worth. But for some, it pushes them over the edge, and they develop a full-blown eating disorder. So.
And that's the group we're talking about. Usually people are suffering from diseases of overabundance in America, but there's a few that just really get caught.
That's right. They get stuck.
And how serious is this?
It's pretty serious. In fact, let's look at the next graphic. 15 to 20% of those with eating disorders may die. This is especially true of anorexia, which is self-starvation. What happens in eating disorders is they take on a life of their own. So once someone starts limiting their food intake, it sort of snowballs, and they start eating less and less, and it feels right to them. And so often anorexics literally starve themselves to death. In fact, eating disorders have the highest fatality rate, the highest risk of premature death of any psychiatric illness.
You know, I used to work for a small, brief amount of time, you know, in psychiatric care, and there was an eating disorders unit that I would float to, and our biggest problem was these people would be, you know, they would be sneaking off and getting rid of the food. They would make it look like they ate the food. I mean, they were like very skilled at this whole thing, and they were just set on their goal of losing weight. I mean, they just were focused on that. So this is really, you know, this is really an issue. And of course, you've been through this. What kind of is there help? Is there hope? Is there for the person that's been there? You're a survivor.
I'm a survivor. This is about 25 years ago now, so it's a long time in the past, but I'm a survivor of anorexia. There are two types of anorexic. One is a binging, purging type, and the other is just someone who just limits their food intake, and I was that type. I just, you know, it took on a life of its own, like I said, and I started to become sort of obsessed with the whole conquest of being thin, and I didn't realize how bad off I was. I was in the process of dating my husband, and he would tell me things because he had been through something kind of similar. And in fact, there are a couple kinds of anorexia. One has to do with religion, and the other has to do with diet and thinness and fashion. The majority are the fashion oriented ones, but there's a few people that develop anorexia because they're trying to attain to a certain spirituality. And that was true of him when he was in his spiritual search in life. He was involved with various Eastern communities, Eastern religion communities, and he ended up starving himself down to 120 pounds, and he's 5'8" and very broad-shouldered, big-boned guy, and so this was very, very underweight for him, and he collapsed on the floor and was not able to eat, and he ended up living through the experience, but he saw me in the condition I was in and wanted to help me, and so he was able to minister to me, and he would say things to me that would sort of help me recognize that there was something really wrong. And I want to say that most definitely there is hope. I was on the way down as an anorexic. In fact, my lowest weight was 85 pounds.
85?
85 pounds, and that's...
And you were still the same height and everything.
Same height, and so I'm 115, so that would be 30 pounds. That would be 30 pounds off me, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I'm thin, you know, so that was really, really, really starving. And so my lowest weight was 85 pounds. So today, this is...
Now you run a restaurant. I mean, that's like the opposite.
And I mean, I pour olive oil on my food. I mean, anorexics will avoid calories as best they can and eat lots of lettuce and carrots and grapes and things that are going to burn off right away. But I'm always trying to gain weight. I have this ectomorphic body type. And so I need to clarify that a thin person is not an anorexic necessarily. You know, just because someone's thin,
right.
That may just be the way they're made. And it is kind of the way I'm made. But I'm constantly trying to gain weight, eating things that are too rich.
See, I've never been on a program where a woman will tell me how much they weigh. So, I mean, this is like the first for me. But that's great. I mean, that's very necessary. And your husband, how much does he weigh now?
Oh, he's fine. He's like, I don't know, 150 or something. I haven't asked him recently, to be honest with you.
But he's
fine.
Looking buff and good.
Oh,
he's a roofer. He's a physical kind of guy.
Yeah, he never went back. Neither of us. And that's the thing is that often people ask me, you know, well, do you still struggle with this? Not at all. And so apparently it can be completely overcome if you look at my own experience.
So just, you know, we have about a minute left. Is there a spiritual component that helped you?
Oh, definitely. You know, I'm going to touch on this in a later segment, but all of the techniques that they have in the counseling field really don't work that well on eating disorders, but I have discovered that grace has a very high success rate. Every person that I talked to was helped by God.
We've been talking with Jennifer Swerzer. We've been talking about anorexia and bulimia. You can get some of this information or more of it, more information about her book, Dying to Be Beautiful, on her website, jenniferjill.org. Thank you so much for coming and sharing the information. I'm looking forward to exploring more of this with you and other programs. But two things I'm thankful for: the research you've done and the fact that you're willing to share your personal testimony. And thank you for watching us today. We're glad and we hope that as a result you have health that lasts for a lifetime.